Today's topic is college education entrance exam preparation and how to prepare for these exams. Some of you are preparing to apply for undergraduate programs. Other ones are preparing to apply for graduate programs. I'm qualified to speak to this because I have already done the undergraduate portion of that, and I took the GRE just last summer because I'm getting ready to do my applications for graduate school. And so I thought I would just give you guys some tips, bits of advice that have helped me personally in the process of preparing, how I went about creating my study plan to use my time as effectively and strategically as possible. And so I hope that you guys will also do the same. What kind of exams are you guys going to probably take? I know that you guys, for the ones who are in high school getting ready to apply for an undergraduate program, it's most likely the SAT. I included the ACT, at least the logo of it. I didn't know if you guys also are allowed to take the ACT internationally or not. It doesn't really matter, I guess, because you can take the SAT, which I know for sure you can take. And then for graduate programs, you have two exams as well, which is the GRE, which I mentioned that I previously took, and then you have something called the GMAT. Now, if you have the option of, especially for grad students, if you have the option to take both, I would recommend sometimes taking both. And the same goes for high school students. If you're allowed to take the ACT, I would recommend taking that one maybe as well. And the reason I would say so is just because sometimes students perform better on one type of test than the other. They're not that different, but at the same time, the testing conditions and environments might be a little bit different and might be a little bit more towards your style. And so if you have the option to take a different kind of test, so the ACT instead of the SAT or vice versa, maybe that's an option you guys should all look into. Just to kind of jump into it already, just so for the sake of time, I told you guys that we're going to talk about how do you craft an exam preparation plan. And that's really what today's presentation is going to be all about, is your plan. So you guys all know already that you have to take the exam. Now, knowing that information, what should you do next? What should your next steps be? What kind of plans, what kind of strategies should you look at? I know this first kind of slide seems very basic and very obvious and intuitive to you all when I say practice exam, but I don't mean to actually physically just practice, but what I mean here is take a practice exam. And the reason I say take a practice exam is because for me, in my experience and from what I've seen with other students, a practice exam is a great diagnostic kind of level / tool for you to see how you would perform right now. And in actuality, before you even begin studying for any of these exams, I recommend that you guys start with a practice exam. I know it seems a little bit weird because some people say, oh, well, I haven't prepared at all, so I'm going to do very poorly. I won't get a good grade. And I always tell them, well, it's okay. I mean, it's a practice exam, and that's the point. The point of a practice exam is to tell you what you do know and what you don't know. For me, when I was taking the GRE just this past summer, that's the first thing I did was I just took the practice exam to see what questions I had the most difficulty with and what questions I actually performed very well with. And to take it a step further even, I would recommend that you guys even replicate the testing conditions. And by that, I mean you give yourself time constraints. You put yourself in an environment where there are no distractions. You don't have any access to technology where you can look up the questions or you're like, ooh, I forgot this. Let me just look at this really quick. No resources, no pages around you, no nothing. Act as if you were actually taking the exam and sit down and take a practice exam. The really good thing is that each of those 4 different tests that I mentioned, they all on their main official websites normally provide one official free exam, if not more, because they want to make as many resources available to you as possible. They don't want cost to be a barrier for you in most cases. Obviously, some resources will cost money, and that's up to you if you want to spend that money or not, but there almost always is, and from what I looked recently, I still think there are practice exams that are free that are official as well. And so I recommend that before you do any kind of plan, you start with this step. This is the most important step, because how can you know what you need to study if you haven't even taken the exam yet? Otherwise you're just studying and not knowing what you should focus on, and you're not using your time effectively. And I see people make this mistake a lot. My little sister, when she was taking the SAT 2 years ago, almost a year ago, she was doing that, and I had to remind her and told her that she should take the practice exam first. So that's my biggest piece of advice to start with. And then next, I would probably follow up with something that you guys have already heard. This is not a new idea, so I haven't created something brand new with this tip, but prep books. There are so many prep books out there, and I'm almost certain that maybe some of you are using prep books already to help you prepare for these exams. But like I said, there are so many different companies that produce these prep books. And so how do you know which one you should probably use? For me, and in my personal experience, what I found was most effective was I got the prep books that were the official study guides. So these are, for example, if I take the SAT, this is the official SAT study guide from College Board themselves. Or the GRE, I actually have this book. It's from ETS themselves. Maybe they're not as extensive as some of the other companies that produce study guides, but these, the reason I recommend the official ones is because they include questions that are most similar to what you're going to actually see, and they actually pull from questions in their examples from previous tests from like a while back ago. So you're not going to necessarily get the exact same question, but you will get a feel for the types of questions. And I think that's what's really important here. So my next tip is really, if you're going to invest in a prep book, I would invest in the official one first. If you've read through the official one, you've done everything you can, and you still want more practice, by all means, go get another one, because the more practice, the better, obviously. But I would start with these because these are the closest to the exam as you can possibly get. And they also include other practice tests in addition to the one that you will have already taken, which is the diagnostic one that I mentioned, to help you kind of get ahead. Now, I will kind of note that obviously these things cost money. And so if cost is of an issue to you, I would look into getting a used one. The world is very connected with globalization, so you don't necessarily have to get a new one. I got a used one and I was perfectly fine with that because I only needed it for like the amount of time I was going to have it. And I didn't care what condition it was really in because I was just going to read it and practice with it. I'm not keeping it to like have in perfect condition. I included these images because I believe these are what the actual official study guides, the covers of them look like. So if you guys wanted to take a photo of them with your phone, you can also always look them up. But if you're going to invest in one, invest in these first and foremost. My next tip, and again, probably something very intuitive for you all, is the sooner you start studying, the better. Now, why do I say that? I know you guys are going to say, oh, well, we already know. It's very obvious. We have more time to study, then we have more time to do things. But it's not only that. I think the biggest reason I say the sooner you start, the better, is because you're going to be busy in your everyday lives. You guys are all students right now, for the most part, or some of you are working professionals getting ready now to go to a graduate program. You have busy schedules, and I understand that, you know that, a lot of people understand that. With busy schedules, the issue is you don't always have the time to study. And so if you start studying a month before you need to take the exam, then that means that you need to devote more hours each day to the exam, which then makes it more exhausting. It makes it more burdensome. It makes it just a much more tiring and demanding process as a whole. To avoid that, for your mental health and also for your performance on the exam, I think the most important thing here is if you give yourself enough time, so a comfortable amount of time to study, then you're taking away the burden on yourself, because then you only have to do about an hour a day if you're going to prepare for like 3-4 months versus a month, you know? And that's a big difference, because having to study 3 to 4 hours a day because you have just a month to prepare, that's a lot. And that can actually be very difficult for you to memorize all of the information that you're taking in such a short amount of time. I know as students, we kind of are taught to take in a lot of information, then take the exam and then move on to the next thing. But with these exams, sometimes that's not the case. And you will definitely perform better if you give yourself a safe amount of time to do the exam and prepare for the exam. My next kind of big key point here is strategize. The reason I say strategize is because this whole exam is basically all boils down to what kind of strategy you have given yourself. When I say strategize, I mean that more in the sense that when you're preparing to study for these questions, these tests aren't looking just to see if you can solve the question. You know, for example, if they give you a math question, there might be 5 different ways you can solve the math question. And they know that, but they want to see, are you quick on your feet? Can you find the quickest way, the most efficient way to solve a question, whether it's a math question, a qualitative question, a writing portion, whatever. These questions are really about strategy and how effectively you can use your time. And so what I recommend for you guys, a good tip that helped me, was I Googled all the strategies that I could find that people were using to help themselves. So for example, what this looks like on the math, especially on math problems, as I mentioned, there might be 5 ways you can solve a certain type of math question. Look up the strategy as to how people solve those kinds of questions so that then you're using the fastest method. Because the method that you're using, even though it works, might not necessarily be the most effective, and then you're wasting time, and it most likely will result in a lower score, which we obviously do not want. So strategies, these exams are all about strategies. Whether you like it or not, it's not, unfortunately, just a measure or an assessment of how much or what you know. It's how you are able to apply it in a limited amount of time. That's another key component of these exams, and that's why the strategy component of this is added to it. And so, like I said, my biggest advice is go on Google. Google is your best friend. There are so many people who have been taking these types of exams for ages. The GRE, especially, when I took those prep books, I did the practice exams. When you look back at the practice exams, they give you what the right answers are and they explain them. In the explanations, they actually tell you that this question falls under this category of questions. And here's the strategies that you should normally think to use if you're going to get this kind of question. And so that helped me write all of those strategies down so that next time when I took my next practice test, I used those strategies and I saw a much higher result, a much better result. And I was doing so in a much more comfortable amount of time. So I wasn't taking as much time to take the exam. So definitely Google those strategies. I can't include them all here because, like I said, there's 4 exams. The SAT math portion will be different from the GRE math portion. Same for the verbal, same for the writing. And that's why I didn't include all the things, because it's just too much to include and it's different and very specific to each test. But you can easily find it if you just Google SAT math strategies, SAT verbal section strategies, writing section strategies. Those things will help you because people who have taken these exams and who have taken them multiple times, they will share their tips and their resources with you for free, And so that's not something we always get to have the benefit of, our free resources. And so we should definitely capitalize upon those. My next kind of tip that I did when I was preparing and making my plan was I incorporated study groups into my strategy. For the most part, I studied by myself because I focus better when I'm just by myself in a very quiet environment. Everybody has their own different learning style and different learning method. And so you know yourself best and you know what kind of learning style or study style you need for yourself. However, even though I study best when I'm by myself and doing everything by myself, I utilize study groups for a variety of different reasons. One, it's good to change up your study habits and how you are taking in the information, because then it constantly gets your brain working and thinking in different ways because you're in different environments. Two, if you have other individuals who you're preparing with, they're resources to you, just like those, if you Google strategies and the strategies that people put up there are resources. The people in your study group are big assets, big resources to you as well, because there might be a question that they know how to solve very easily. They know the perfect strategy for that question and you don't. And so they can explain that to you. And especially if you guys are studying in a group, you can say, oh, did anybody answer this question? How did you get it? How did you do it? And now you have somebody who's explaining something to you for free. And they're giving their expertise to you. And it's also beneficial for them because if you explain something to somebody else, you reaffirm the knowledge that you're learning at the same time. So if I'm trying to explain to you why this math problem should be solved this way, I'm going to remember that myself while I explain it to somebody. And so study groups are really an important way for you guys to just reaffirm the knowledge that you are constantly going to be learning in preparation for these exams. But also it's a different way for you to practice. I remember when I was preparing for the SAT back in high school, about 4 or 5 of my friends, we would go to the library. We would just get one of the conference rooms that had a big whiteboard, and one person would go up for about 15 minutes and they would write the questions on the whiteboard and we would all solve them at the same time. Afterwards, we would compare our answers, we would look, we would see, we would discuss, move on to the next question. And those kinds of exercises, especially in a group environment, are really effective because you're getting feedback, you're discussing, and you're not only just looking at what the right answer is, but because you're discussing the question, you're also better understanding the concept behind the question. So that then when you get a similar question, but with different numbers or different words, you will know how to solve that one as well, because you will have understood the question itself and not just the answer. And that's something that's really important to note, is because when you're studying, sometimes we have the habit of just looking, okay, I got it wrong, I got it right, that's it. But you need to be making sure you understand why you got it right or why you got it wrong. It's not about just getting it right or wrong. It's about knowing and understanding and having a proficient grasp of the concept behind the question that it is asking. That is something that you guys should be able to use as a tool for yourselves, hopefully. I know right now with coronavirus, you might not be able to meet up in big groups, but even Skype sessions, Zoom calls, you can have 4 people, 5 people, however many people on a Zoom call. Someone shares their screen and solves some problems, and you guys can help each other. You guys are resources, and you guys have that benefit, especially because you're a part of the Education USA kind of community. And so it's easy for you to find other people to study with because they're already here. You don't even have to really go find them. They're kind of given to you. Same for the GRE and everything else. And so I would recommend you use these kinds of resources as best as possible and to the maximum potential that you can. Because in the end, long term, you're helping yourself, whether you're explaining something to somebody or somebody is explaining something to you. My next thing that really helped me a lot, it was word of the day. Word of the day, and also I should probably say, I should have put like a hyphen, problems of the day, like math problems of the day really helped me because repetition, even in Russian, they say, повторение мать учения. So like when you're doing repetition all the time, it's a great way for you to exercise these routine kind of questions you might come across on the exam, whether they're math questions or verbal questions. And so I used some apps/websites that helped me a lot. If you guys have a smartphone or some kind of access, I'm sure you guys do, to some kind of technology, you can download these kinds of apps. I used The Economist, the GRE vocabulary. You can also do SAT vocabulary, I believe. And I also used an app called Magoosh. These apps are really great because I don't even have to click on them every morning. Instead, it sends me a reminder in the morning saying, hey, your word of the day is blah, blah, blah. And then I know that's my word of the day. And I look it up. I look up the definition and I try to use it throughout the day just a few times to really make sure that I'm remembering the word, not that I'm just memorizing a long list of words, but that I'm effectively using my time by understanding how the word is used, not just the meaning of the word. And having said that, the reason I put The Economist here is because why I like The Economist is it's a newspaper. It's a really prominent newspaper in the world, actually, especially in the English-speaking world, it's a prominent newspaper that people read. And The Economist, the great thing is for their vocabulary sections and prep for these kinds of exams, they include real-life examples of how the words are used. So not only do they give you the word and the definition, but they give you the examples of how it's used in a real context, not a made-up example sentence. So when I go on The Economist and I look up how proclivity is used, it gives me an excerpt from a newspaper or a literature piece showing me how it's used in real life. And that's really effective because then I understand what context this word can be used in and what it can't be used in. Because then when you take the exam, you will see that, oh, okay, I saw this word being used in this way. It was when they were talking about this and this. And I see they're talking about something the same, so I guess I should use this word here and not this one. That'll help you a lot, You need to really understand the use of the word and not just the definition. Because if you just memorize the definitions, it's not going to help you. And I know that personally because when I first studied for the SAT, I remember I had a long list of words and I just kept studying and studying and studying. And I didn't really find that it helped me when I took the exam because I knew the definitions, but I didn't know how to use the words. So I kind of knew what it meant, but I never saw what kind of sentences they were being put into. And so that's really important that you give yourself the how of these words. So how are they being used, not just the what is the definition behind them. So these are 2 really great examples. There are a bunch of other apps and other things. And so you don't have to only use these 2. I use The Economist as well because I remember somebody saying for the GRE, for example, that a lot of the words on the GRE version of The Economist's page were actually on the test. And so it helped them a lot. And I did that. And I found that a good amount of the words also were on my test. So it's not to say that they will all be there. And I can't guarantee anything because I don't write the test. But these kinds of things, especially if they're prominent sources, are probably more reputable and more of credible components of your study plan. And so I definitely encourage you guys all to use them wisely. Now, kind of the final bit, I think, of my tips that I can give you guys to really prepare when you're creating your plans. And I think this is probably the biggest component of putting all of the rest of them together is a study schedule. I know maybe it seems really silly, and no, you don't need to create a study schedule like this. This is just a photocopy of an example of what somebody's calendar might look like. A study schedule is really important, not just so that you know when you're going to study, but I found it was important for me because it made sure that I was committed to actually devoting a certain amount of time each day towards studying. Because if I just tell myself, okay, Vlad, I'm going to study 2-3 times a week, maybe an hour, 2 hours, and that's it. And, I think after a few months, I'll be good. Well, I don't know when I'm going to study. I've kept it very vague, very flexible. So I'm not holding myself accountable to anything. And when I don't hold myself accountable, well, then it's easy for me to just push it off because, like I said in the beginning, we all have busy lives. And so something's going to come up. Your friend's going to call you. You're going to have to go to work. You have a school project. You have something else you have to do. Your favorite TV show just came on. Whatever. You're going to get distracted and you're going to say, oh, I'll just do it later. And then later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. And before you know it, it's exam day and you haven't studied. And so a study schedule is really good because it holds you accountable and makes sure you are committed. 2, it gives you a little bit of a better, more like organized outline. So if I have 3 months, I can see how I can best use my 3 months and how much time, how many days I have. So if I'm really strong in math, but weak in verbal, I can dedicate maybe out of the 3 months, 1 week in each month for math sections, and then the rest of the 3 weeks in each month to verbal sections. And so that then there's a proportional amount to each section that is tailored specifically to my needs, to what I need as an individual. And so that's important because then you're able to see, okay, I have this many days for this one, that one. And if something's not working, you can change it and you can always look at your outline. And so I think that's really important for you guys to do. I know it seems very maybe elementary or very silly even, but I really do recommend you guys make a study schedule because you'll be surprised if you actually take the time to make the study schedule. Subconsciously, your mind will kind of push you to already follow the schedule and actually do it. And you'll be better off then because you're actually sticking to your study plan of maybe 2 hours a day, 5 hours a week, whatever you see you need for yourself. Please use this. I encourage you guys to use it. It's really important. So kind of just to recap before I give you guys just the floor for questions. I put these kind of strategies again, just in an organized order. And so your first thing that you need to do is give yourself a comfortable amount of time, especially for the people who do not have to take the exam, maybe for another year. I took the GRE, like I said, last summer. I'm not applying for graduate programs until this coming fall. And I'll start them only in the fall, kind of. I took it a year early because I knew A, I wanted to prepare and give myself enough time. And B, even if I prepare, it doesn't mean that I'm going to get the score I necessarily want. But since I took it early, I have enough time to still kind of recalculate and say, okay, I can take the exam a few more times if I would like and try to get a better score. And so that's why it's also really important that you start early, is that you give yourself that space, that kind of cushion, as we say, to fall back on if something doesn't go as planned. Because sometimes it doesn't. You might not always get the score you want, unfortunately, even if you study 10 hours a week or 10 hours a day for a whole month, Once you give yourself a comfortable amount of time, like I said, first and foremost, start with the practice exam. Don't start studying right away because you won't know what to study for. You're just reading things. You're like, okay, new information. I'll practice this. I practice that. But you don't know where you should specifically concentrate your time. So that practice exam will be a diagnostic test to tell you exactly where you should concentrate it. Afterwards, you can also get prep books. And those prep books that I showed you, those are great ones. They also have prep books for specific sections. So the GRE official guide has a specific prep book just for the math section. They also have one just for the verbal section. And so you can get the specific one that you need too if you don't want to get the general one or the math one if you're already really good at math. Just an option to you guys. Next, like we said, words of the day. You guys are all really tech savvy, I know, especially in this day and age and my generation as well. We use technology more and more. And so let technology be your friend in this case. Those random notifications that you get from Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, contacte, doesn't matter. Instead of having those notifications, have your word of the day notifications or the notification to do your problem of the day. That's a great use of your time, and it takes like maybe 2 minutes and you don't even think about it. So it's good. And lastly, make sure you set up that study schedule. When you have that study schedule, you know exactly what you're doing. You hold yourself accountable, and then you guys will be better off long term and hopefully perform much better on the SAT, GRE, GMAT, or whatever else you will take. First question, do you recommend to buy an account in Magoosh with a ready study plan? I didn't buy. I try to save as much money as possible. I will say that first. I didn't want to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on resources, especially if I felt like the resources might not necessarily help me. And like I said, with technology, there are so many resources out there that you can get free ones. The Magoosh app, I used a free word of the day Magoosh app, for example. I didn't buy one, and I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend buying the Ready Study Plan with Magoosh, because I feel like the official test sites would probably have something similar. And I always would stray on the side of caution. And maybe if they have an official version, always use the official version first, and then what other companies there are after. It's not to say that the other companies aren't good or better or they're worse. It's just that the official companies, they're the ones making the test. And so if they're giving you a study guide, they know what kind of study guide you need. The other companies, they don't. They don't make the test. They've taken the test a bunch of times, but they don't know what kind of questions are specifically going to be on there for sure. The companies who are making them do. And so that's why I would recommend following their resources. Is Khan Academy a good website to prepare? So Khan Academy, just like Magoosh, they're very similar. Khan Academy is a great, incredible source here in the US. But again, my only kind of issue with the other companies is they're not the official ones. And so they aren't the ones creating the questions, but they are a great site. They have people who have taken these exams so many times, so they know what kinds of questions you need to prepare for. So they know the concepts really well. So, I mean, it would still help you to use their websites to prepare, especially if they have free resources. If they have a free trial, even if it's a week trial, use it. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything. If you want to go ahead and invest in something like Khan Academy or Magoosh's study plan, if you want to do that, by all means do it. But just make sure you're really using all the resources that you're paying for, because sometimes you end up paying for so many different things and you only really used one book and that's all you really needed. Then you wasted time and money, and nobody likes to waste money. The next question is, do you think there will be any changes in universities' admission process because of the COVID, especially US universities? That's a great question. I actually really like that question, because before I started this call, I just got an email from the GRE saying, we saw you took the GRE a year ago. You might want to maybe see if you want to take it again, you can. They're doing them remotely from home right now. And I thought it was interesting because normally they don't do these exams from home. And so I can't speak to what the universities will specifically do. I know some universities are waiving the entrance exam requirements completely right now because it's not possible for some students to take the exam. They can't go to the testing centers. And for the other exams that are offered online that you can do at home, I think there's just a worry of, is it really a trustworthy source? So if I take it at home, yes, they watch me through the camera, but what if I have some secret thing maybe that I'm using to help me, And so maybe people are getting higher scores. So I definitely would say I won't be surprised if they maybe waive, if not make them optional. But if you have taken the exam or you're getting ready to take it, still take it, because you might do really well. And in that case, doing really well is never going to hurt you. It's only going to help you. But there have been already some changes that I know for like all of the universities in California. So UCLA, University of California, all the sites that they have anyways, all the UC schools is what we call them. They waived, I think, all the SAT requirements and the ACT. And I don't know about the GRE, but those are some changes that I think other universities might see as well. So I wouldn't be surprised. How to review your mistakes in verbal part. Math is much easier to review, but to handle the verbal part is so overwhelming. I'm studying myself and I often don't want to review the verbal part. I was using 1600, which was so good, but I finished college board tests. I am in the same boat as you. When I took my GRE, I'm actually much stronger in math than I am in the verbal section. The reason the verbal section was hard for me is because there's so many random words. I didn't know them, especially because they're very academic and very literature type words. But the best way to review them is when you make a mistake, so you don't use the right question, I remember like they give you multiple choice, first of all. So there's 5 words you can choose from to put into the blank. For example, even if I got the question right and if I got the question wrong, I always made sure I did 2 things. One, I knew all the words that were given as options. Why? Because if I ever see any of them again, I want to make sure I know them. 2, I looked up how to use them in a sentence. Online, if you just type in the word into Google, there'll be examples of how they've been used in the past. And so that helped me understand the how the word was being used. And that's all I can really stress for the verbal part is when you're reviewing your mistakes, that's really all you can do. And it is tiring and it's very overwhelming. I didn't like it. I think I hated it probably more than you hate it. I remember I was doing it every day thinking this is stupid, this is pointless, but it's just something kind of you have to do, you know. There's no really clever way to how to review them, but I will say there is an effective way, and that is to learn how the word is used. Because if you learn how the words are being used, you don't have to just memorize a bunch of definitions that hurt your brain. Instead, you just know how it's used in what context, and that is a much better approach, and it's more effective. Where can we find appropriate SAT practice tests if we finished all tests in official College Board books? In that case, you can go online. If you type in literally SAT practice tests, there are so many on there. They're not going to maybe be the official ones, but they're still very similar questions. Some might be from places like Khan Academy, Princeton Review, etc. They offer some free ones as well. Now, if you want to get that prep book or if you want to buy those practice exams, that's also an option. But like I said, I didn't want to burden myself financially preparing for these things because I wanted to focus more on the material and not on having to pay for so many things. Google is your resource. You can find a lot of free practice exams if you look online. I know the SAT was changed. I think it was changed actually the year after I took it, the structure of it a bit. So maybe there's not as many resources, but you can definitely still find free examples if you just type in free SAT practice tests. And you know, taking a practice test, even if it's not an official one, never hurts you. By you practicing something, you're not doing yourself a disservice. You're only doing yourself a favor because then you're making sure that you're covering all of your bases. What was your schedule? So I started, like I said, I did the GRE I took it last summer and I took it at the end of the summer. And I started studying for it probably middle of May. And so I took it at the end of August. So I had about 3.5 months. And I literally took the ETS book, official guidebook, everywhere with me. It was like my best friend. And so even when I was on vacation sitting by the pool somewhere, I was reading that book. I just told myself an hour of active concentrated reading a day was enough for me. I did it just 5 times of the 7 days, not to overburden myself. And 3.5 months is a lot of time. And so I was able to give myself enough time to really take in the information and not overburden my brain. Especially with the words, it's hard to remember 1,000 words. And you guys aren't native speakers of English, so it's even more difficult for you. So that's why I recommend you guys start even earlier than maybe me. 6 months, I know it seems crazy, but then you can take a more relaxed approach and you'll be surprised. The more relaxed approach is sometimes more effective. So I got a question from someone who said they can't solve math problems in GRE general, how to handle them. Again, when you take that practice exam, it explains the concept of the types of questions. So even though the numbers might be different, the type of question and the categories of questions, especially for the math section, there's specific types. So there's algebra, there's geometry, and then there's specific categories within each of those sections. Those practice exams, when you're reviewing, they show you how to solve those things and they give you the strategies. And so if you're not really good at math, I would recommend looking at those strategies. Because remember what I said, it's not necessarily if you know how to solve the problem, it's how you know how to solve the problem. And so if you know the strategy, but you don't really get the question, but you know how to solve it with some quick strategy, great. You don't really have to worry then. But I know math is really complicated for a lot of people. And so what I recommend is really just focus slowly on each category and each type of math question you're going to see. So focus first on geometry, then algebra, then pre-algebra, etc. And that'll help you a lot. I guarantee it. In what cases is it wise to hire a teacher? Again, if you have that resource, especially that financial resource available to you for somebody to hire somebody, that's great. It's never going to hurt you. But just make sure that that person actually is qualified to prepare you really well for the exam. Because the SAT, the reason, for example, the SAT was recently changed the year after mine was because there's too many prep programs, especially here where I live in Texas. We have like weekend school where people go and they just study, study, study to get perfect scores on these exams. And that's not really the point of the SAT. The SAT is a diagnostic test to see how you would perform at the end of your studies before you go on to the next level. And so it's not really meant to be something you actively prepare for. I say that just so that if you do find a teacher, make sure that they are really familiar with the new structure and they know the things really well, because it seems like they're trying to slowly change the exams more and more so that you can't just prepare for them. But I think for right now, you should still be okay. So if I can recommend videos for the math GRE, and somebody earlier mentioned Khan Academy, and I would say probably to look at videos. Khan Academy is really good because they have videos where they actually are on a whiteboard and they explain how to work a problem. So that might be a really good resource for you guys if you're a visual learner to see how to work through problems in each different category of math questions.